Continuing the greatest Seafair coverage ever, King TV presents Hydro Previews in color from the shores of Lake Washington. Hydro Previews, a look at the boats and drivers busy preparing for tomorrow's champion unlimited hydroplane race. And now, here's King TV Sports Director, Ray McMacken.
Hello, everyone, from beautiful Lake Washington, where the weather is absolutely perfect and the racing conditions ideal. It's been that way all week, and of course, with the big race just 1 day away, it promises to be more of the same tomorrow for the 1972 Seafair Trophy race. The drivers and the boats are set to send those famous Roostertails flying right here on KING with the complete coverage beginning at 11 o'clock tomorrow. My co-host for Hydro Preview this evening, he's no introduction certainly, veteran broadcaster, former King sports director, and a darn nice guy. Rod Belcher, right?
Hey, Ray, that's fine. I think I'll take this safari hat off now and take my chances in the sun because, as you say, the weather's been great. Well, our purpose today on Hydro Previews, among other things, is to cover the drivers' meeting. That's important, of course. And we'll talk about what changes are planned in the racing rules and the race format for this year. Later on, we'll take a look into some of the past history of the sport, especially here on Lake Washington. We'll also see, of course, the qualifying runs of today and earlier in the week, and be talking with the drivers, owners, and some other people connected with the big race. Now, one of the reasons that most Seattleites who will watch the race on television tomorrow will be watching King TV is, of course, Bill Muncey. Once again, this year, Channel 5 is proud to have Bill as part of our broadcast crew. And, Bill, come on in, will you?
Thanks a million, Rod. Once again, it's just tremendous experience for me to be a part of the extended coverage, the racing coverage of King's experience, certainly, over a period of time. For the Seafair Trophy race, our boat's been great. It's been a marvelous season for us. We've had a lot of wins. The boat has good top speed. She sprints well. She corners well. And the best thing she does, certainly thus far this year, is she's been able to win magnificently. We'd like nothing better than to be able to win the Seattle Seafair Trophy race tomorrow.
And with us again this year in the pit area, that hustling reporter, Al Caw. Al?
I'm covering the east finger piers in these pits. The piers taken up by the U-7, the Notre Dame, and the Pride of Pay and Pack. The Notre Dame is now undergoing some last-minute work. She was in the water this morning, turned a fairly fast speed, 117 miles per hour plus, third fastest in qualifying. I'll also be looking for Bill Muncey in the Miss Atlas van lines. I'll be looking for the Value Mart, and after that, you'll get the rest of the boats from Mike Rhodes.
Thank you, Al, and we have a large number of boats down here. As a matter of fact, 2 of my birds are out and running now. The Budweiser just came back from a respectable turn around the course with Terry Sterrett, and Bernie Little and Terry and the boys are working the boat over now, preparatory to taking it out of the water. We'll be talking about the Lincoln Thrift, the Miss Budweiser, the Smythe, the Smoother Mover, the Vans PX, and another one that just went out, Miss Timex with Jim McCormick. We have a lot of activity on both sides of this pier for the entire day of the racing, and also from time to time you'll get a glimpse of a boat that won't be running, but certainly it is a good sight to see, and that is the Miss Thriftway, which is here just for viewing purposes. There's no power in it, nobody to drive it, but it certainly brings back a lot of memories. We'll have a lot of activity for you here, a lot of people to talk with, but we have the whole crew spread out around this pit area, including Marty Wyatt, so we'll hear from Marty at this time. Marty?
You know, many times feature information in the pit area offers some of the most interesting and humorous sidelights into the lives and activities of these professional hydroplane drivers and their crews. Again, this year, King TV will utilize one of the most experienced hydroplane experts in the Northwest, in Mike Fitzsimmons.
Thank you very much, Marty. This Seafair Trophy race promises to be one of the most exciting we've ever seen in Seattle. With the new innovation in the engine of the Lincoln Thrift 7.25% special and some substantial hull changes made on many of the familiar boats, we're going to have one of the most exciting Seafair Trophy races we've ever seen. And King's 22 years of coverage is going to give the most experienced and in-depth view of unlimited hydroplane racing in Seattle. Back to you, Ray.
Well, thank you, Mike. And that, folks, is the entire team here on King. We'll be bringing you the activities today and tomorrow of the Seafair Trophy race for 1972. King's color coverage of Hydro Previews will continue after this message. Mackin, along with Rod Belcher here, just prior to the all-important drivers and owners meeting. here on this Saturday night, the night before the big 1972 Seafair Trophy race. And I guess the big question that will come up during this driver's race, Rod, will be whether one of the boats, the Smythe Smooth Remover, can be qualified to race tomorrow, being that it didn't qualify the past 3 days.
Well, it's happened before, Ray, as you can recall, I'm sure, that they have declared boats in. And this is a local boat, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if they didn't do it. If they do, of course, we have a 10-boat field. If it's not in, it's a 9-boat field. And the lineup goes like this. I think you have it there as well as I do. And, you know, you have the 5 faster boats. They will actually be running second in the order of things in the different sections of the heats tomorrow.
Well, I'll take Flight 1, Rod, and then quickly you can run down Flight 2. In Flight 1, we have, as Rod said, the fastest 5 boats tomorrow will be the Pride of Pay Impact. Billy Sterrett, the driver, qualifying at that record world speed, 125.874. That's the number 1 boat. The number 2 boat with Bill Muncey at the wheel, the Atlas Van Lines, 120.536 the qualifying speed. Notre Dame will be the number 3 boat in Flight 1 tomorrow, with Dean Chenoweth, the driver, qualifying at a speed of 116.757. The Miss Budweiser, Ernie Little is the owner, Terry Sterrett, the driver. He is the brother of Billy Sterrett, the driver of the Pay and Pack. The Budweiser number 4, qualifying at a speed of 115.508. And rounding out the field in flight number 1 tomorrow will be the Lincoln Thrift and Savings. George Henley at the wheel, the cab-over model boat. You can recognize that one very easily, qualifying at a speed of 111.455 for flight number 2, right.
And flight number 2, of course, is the one that goes on the lake first and starts that first section at 12 noon sharp tomorrow, all things being on time, which we assume they will be, Ray. And that's going to be Pizza Pete at the head of the list. Bob Gilliam almost ran too fast, but not quite. He really knew he was going to get in the slower heat. But he heads the list at 104 plus. He's the owner and driver. Then we have Jim McCormick in the Miss Timex, also at 104 plus and just a little bit slower than Gilliam's qualifying speed. Leif Borgeson qualified the Vance PX at something over 102 miles an hour. And the 4th boat officially in, as we're talking to you now, is the Value Mart with Bill Worcester, the driver, at just barely getting in at 100.4 and some odd hundredths in there. Now, the Smythe Smoother Mover with Chuck Hickling, as we say, we're waiting to hear something official on it. We haven't heard, Ray, have we? You haven't heard anything since I've been talking to you.
Well, the real expert is sitting right here to my right, Bill Muncey. Do you think, Bill, that the Smythe will be allowed to run? Do you think that'll be the question brought up? Do you think it'll be allowed?
I think that is going to happen. Exactly what it is. And really, that's in the interest of racing. Our qualifying out here is we've let the public take a serious look at how fast our boats are, and they found out that they're capable of record-breaking performances, and every boat had an opportunity to do that. I think that now, when we get right down to it, right where the grass is bare, as it were, I think that certainly a local boat like the Smythe Smoother Mover with Chuck Hickling, who's a local guy, I think it's great that he can come into the race, and we should certainly let him in. If we have to bend the rules a bit to get it done, it's in the interest of the sport. It's not going to hurt our sport, certainly, nor hurt in the interest of our rules for which they're intended. It's not going to hurt that at all. In the interest of a spectator event, it's going to be great. So I'd be inclined to say, yeah, let's have him there.
And you don't have to run against him, Bill, so you're not worrying at this point anyway.
No, and if I did, I'd probably have to cheat to keep up with him.
Well, we have a 10-second countdown to the start of the owner and driver's meeting here. So as soon as Jimmy McCormick lights his pipe and gets up and gets a seat, I guess they're going to get underway. So here we go.
Everybody should know that this is a family affair, wives and children and all those things.
Thank goodness. It's good to see the wives there.
My very own.
Right.
Hydroplane Trophy race here on beautiful Lake Washington. We brought the weather for you. So far, we've had a very safe operation, and I know that tomorrow we will. I now call the 1972 drivers' meeting to order. I welcome all the drivers and the owners and the great job that they've done so far this week. We've had a lot of quick boats out there on that course, and I know that tomorrow they'll do an outstanding job. I would like now to introduce Lieutenant Gary Smith, PIO officer of the Navy Flight Demonstration Team, the Blue Angels.
Thank you very much. I'd like to take a brief opportunity to introduce the pilots to you that you'll be watching here tomorrow afternoon at 1:15. Flying as opposing solo pilot this year from Oakland, California. In his first year with the team is Steve Lambert. Our lead solo pilot this year is in his third year with the team is Lieutenant Commander Skip Umstead. Flying Blue Angel 4, our slot pilot, one of last year's solo pilots. In his second year with the team is Lieutenant Bill Switzer. Flying left wing in the Diamond, in his second year with the team, Blue Angel 3 is Lieutenant Bill Beardsley. Flying right wing in the Diamond is our Marine Corps representative. In his first year in the team is Marine Corps Captain Mike Murphy. And our officer in charge this year is in his first year with the team from Seattle, Washington, is Lieutenant Commander Don Bentley. And now I'll turn it back over to Jim for the rest of the ceremonies.
Thank you, Gary. We have a new trophy this year. It'll be awarded at the drivers' meeting. And the deed of gift has been given by Mrs. Fay Brow, or Mrs. Bill Brow, as we remember. It is for the fastest qualifier exceeding existing record during the 3 days of qualifying. In this case, the record held by Bill Brow was in 1965 at 120.35 for 9 miles. I now introduce the Fay Brow, who will award this trophy to Bill Sterrett, Jr.
Of course, this is the trophy in behalf of the late Bill Brow, who many hydrobuffs remember. His life was snuffed out down in Florida in 1967 when he was driving the then Miss Budweiser. So this is in memory of the late Bill Brow, a trophy which will go to the fastest qualifier each year. And, of course, the Pride and Pack driver, Billy Sterrett, Jr., won the trophy this year. Bill, it's really a great award to a great man. You knew him personally.
I did indeed, very much. Bill Brow was a Seattle boy who lost his life in the unlimited hydroplane wars down in Tampa, Florida. Tremendous tough competitor. He came up through the ranks here in Seattle, Washington, drove limited boats on Green Lake, set records everywhere he went. He was a tremendous driver, and I think it's just great that Fay and the whole family could come out and be a part of this particular presentation.
I'd like to tell you a little bit about the medical backup tomorrow. We have the United States Coast Guard flying the chopper. We have a doctor on the chopper, as you know. We have the 49th Air Defense Artillery backup chopper. This will be stationed over here in the little lagoon. This will back up if we need an extra chopper to do any evacuation. We will have approximately 14 doctors in the pits. Harborview will be the primary hospital for a major catastrophe. Seattle General and Doctors Hospital will be the secondary hospitals. We have special crews on duty in these three hospitals. We will have approximately 10 nurses on duty. We have 30 doctors on call in their offices or either in the hospital or at home so that we can have them at the hospital if this is needed. Now,
columns of a huge bridge. Although all the drivers are aware of this more than formidable obstacle, it didn't seem to bother anyone in the final heat as Bill Muncey blazed to victory at a speed of 106.523 miles per hour as Schumacher and Terry Sterrett in the Budweiser dueled to second and third places. Pay and Pack finished second at 102.798, and Bud wound up third with a speed of 102.603. The Atlas Van Line victory in the Ohio Governor's Cup Regatta was number 2 in a current total of 5 wins out of 6 races. Bill Muncey finished up the day at Owensboro, Kentucky, a happy man, with optimistic hopes of a great season record.
A crowd of some 200,000 persons turned out Sunday for the country's richest unlimited hydroplane race, the $44,000 Gold Cup on the Detroit River. Among the notables, band leader and former raceboat driver Guy Lombardo. One accident marred the preliminary heats when Notre Dame, driven by Dean Chenoweth, nosed into a swell on the treacherous waters and began to sink. Chenoweth was rushed to the hospital with chest injuries, but is all right today. With qualifying over, 5 boats took the starting flag for the big race and roared down the straightaway, reaching speeds at close to 200 miles an hour. But this was to be no contest, as 4-time Gold Cup winner Billy Muncey quickly gunned his Atlas van lines into the front, never to be seriously challenged. The race was the 3rd major event of the big hydroplane circuit this year, with Muncey winning all 3, and on this day, his 5th Gold Cup. Muncey has spent 29 of his 44 years racing, with 3 national championships along the way, this latest win bringing in nearly $15,000 in prize money. Pride of Pay and Pack, driven by Billy Shoemaker, was second. This is John Hogan in Detroit.
The Atomic Cup at Pasco saw some excitement with the Pride of Pay and Pack experiencing a frozen supercharger, causing the boat to hook right, then left, and finally going dead in the water without causing any damage to any other craft. The incident occurred in the restart of the final heat at Pasco, ending for the Pride of Pay and Pack what could have been a good day. The boat qualified at 120 miles plus on Friday and looked good all through the race up until the lock supercharger problem occurred. In Heat 1B, hydroplane fans saw a couple of exciting laps of contention between Atlas Van Lines and Lincoln Thrift. The Lincoln boat, with its newly designed engine using a manifold power supercharger, stuck like glue to the Bill Muncey craft, but finally gave way to caution and let him go. The final heat found Pay and Pack not surprising anyone, as she pulled away from Atlas in the last turn of lap 2. Muncey's desire for a national championship and some record possibilities in Seattle decided in favor of a solid second rather than fighting it out 2 weeks too soon with Billy Sterrett. But lap 6 of the final heat provided a surprise for Bob Gilliam and robbed Billy Sterrett of his first Atomic Cup, when the Pizza Pete took a bounce and hooked, sending Gilliam into the river for his first bath in 14 years of competition, and stopping the heat just 1/4 of a lap from victory for the Herensberger competition. It was at this point that the final lap was restarted and the Pay and Pack supercharger froze. However, that happened ahead of the starting line. So the race went on, and Bill Muncey and the Atlas Van Lines went on to pick up his first Atomic Cup victory.
Some great film of the runs here on Lake Washington this past week as Hydro Previews continues. Well, this week has certainly seen some exceptionally fast activity, outstanding performances by these boats and drivers on Lake Washington. And obviously the big noise was made in an early hour of the competition when Billy Sterrett took the Pay and Pack, Pride of Pay and Pack out and went a phenomenal nearly 126 miles an hour. And there you see it right now. And Bill Muncey, here's a fellow who was talking perhaps doing as well or nearly as well. And by golly, they kind of beat you to it, being the first boat on the official qualifying course with that fantastic speed. What are your comments?
After watching that, I cease to be inspired. I think really, considering its performance, that I should walk down there and get a good look at the bow of that boat, because it appears after that performance that most of us will be watching its stern all day long on Sunday.
Well, Bill, that's a single boat on the course, though. We know that racing situations are a little different than qualifying situations.
I would like to make this comment. That Pay and Pack performance was a historic one. And I know that to the average person, maybe 5 miles an hour above last year's qualifying speed doesn't sound like too much.
It sounds like plenty to me.
But when you put it into terms of seconds, it's only a couple of seconds, just split seconds, over 120 miles an hour. It all of a sudden gains new meaning as far as those of us in the sport are concerned. And we know that our boat is capable of interesting competitive speeds as well as qualifying speeds, and it's great to be a part of a thing where you can watch a historic performance like 5 miles an hour. That's a bunch of average miles per hour around a race course, an increase.
Well, Bill, you've done well to beat this boat then in earlier races.
Well, I think that, I don't know. I don't believe in luck. I happen to believe in God, and I do believe in our own preparation. I believe in our team and the boat and all that. This team, the Pay and Pack team, opened the season as an odds-on favorite to win everything, and I think that when they got to Miami, the course was a little small. The corners were smaller. The chutes weren't the longest. It was a shorter course completely, and I know that they sort of candidly decided to go through the Eastern Tour knowing that their really strong forte was big corners and big chutes like we'd have in Seattle, and they'd just been waiting for this. They were primed for it, and it was a superior performance by far.
Well, here's an interesting thing, Bill. They went out this morning and were testing, Billy was going down the back chute and pumping it pretty hard, and all of a sudden, kerpop, and he blew a big hole in the engine. And this made me think at the time, doggone it, what if he had possibly damaged the hull? Well, all you chauffeurs think about such possibilities, don't you, on the day before the race?
Oh, indeed. Throughout this qualifying run that we're able to show King's audience right now, you're always concerned about that. Should I bust something, punch a hole in the sponson, hit a beer can, or maybe wind the engine up too tight, or any strange thing happens, as many times it does, in this wild, wonderful world of hydroplane racing. You've got to be concerned about it. But on the other hand, qualifying is important here. It's a historic performance that's watched throughout the world, and I wanted a chance. I'd like to have been able to have a chance to let everybody see how fast the Ellis Van Line really and truly is. I think that maybe she could break the world's record, which is right now at 200 miles an hour, if we ever get a chance to cool it long enough and prepare for that experience. But I was happy with our qualifying run. I know that last year it was a rather historic thing when two boats qualified at 120, and I was glad to be a part of that. I turned the 120, and this year, and no one seemed to be too interested, which I can't blame them. The 125 for the pay and pack was
Bill, I think you pass that off too lightly. Your 120 was not ignored. It just was a little bit overshadowed.
Indeed it was.
But when he jumps it up to almost, 126, that makes people think a little bit.
They seem to at will. They'll be able to go as fast as they want to, whenever they want to do it. And I think it's going to be a great shootout when the final heat comes here in Seattle.
Now that's
our boat. That's the Ellis Van Lines, and she's won 17 out of 18 heats this year.
And we're going into Notre Dame, we're told, right? Okay.
Yeah,
what can you tell us about this boat? Has she got a chance to be a competitor tomorrow?
Well, anybody that goes out and turns 115 mile an hour qualifying has got to be certainly a very serious threat, a serious consideration, because they're pulling all the parts together to make them go that quickly. As I mentioned, it's only split seconds difference between 115 and 125. It really isn't that much as far as in terms of time. In terms of speed, it's phenomenal. So the Notre Dame was a brand new boat this year. They launched it in Miami for the first time in competition. They lost a couple of rudders. They didn't really have a chance to test run it to a point where it was really, find out what would make it competitive. And then they went on to another couple of events. They had some problems with it. And then, of course, it disintegrated. They lost the left side out of it in the Gold Cup in Detroit, Michigan. So since then, it's been in the workshops being repaired to prepare to run in this event in Seattle. And I think they're coming along beautifully to be able to throw a relatively brand new boat in the creek and go out and turn 115 miles an hour. That's not too shabby.
I think you personally have quite a bit of respect for Dean Chenoweth.
Hey, you can't knock the national champion the past 3 years in a row. And I think that the fact that he made a move like he did to a team like the Notre Dame from the Budweiser was a very courageous move on his part. Dean is a great chauffeur. He's one of the few guys who, in my opinion, in the sport, goes racing wholly for racing's sake. It's not for any other interest, and he's a well-to-do, a successful businessman in his own right back in Ohio. So he really isn't in here to make a lot of money or anything like that. He's in here to try and provide the spectators with a superior performance every time, and Dean Chenoweth will do exactly that.
Okay. We'll be seeing the Notre Dame here for just a little bit. No, they're in the Budweiser. Well, there's a boat with a great name. Of course, there have been a lot of different Budweisers, but what about this particular competitor this year?
This boat is...
Adversary.
Yeah, an adversary, a competitor, certainly, and a three-time national champion. I don't know, in Pasco, Washington, Bernie Little, the owner, probably a guy who's contributed as much, or certainly as much as anybody else in racing, in the interest of getting the public's attention to our sport and making a real contribution to the sport. Bernie came into our van, and he just appeared to be a little disillusioned over there because he felt that his boat had been national champion 3 years in a row, but at this point, his boat wasn't up to the performance of some of the other boats in the competition, and he really didn't know what he'd do. He said, I either got to get involved in the acquisition of brand new equipment, or I'm going to have to get out of the sport. So I'm inclined to think that Bernie did indicate to me on King Television that he's going to be for sure in the sport next year, and I know if he does, it's going to involve certainly a new hull. So he's got a very fine chauffeur in Terry Sterrett, comes from a racing tradition just beautifully, and if he comes with new equipment next year, it could be a formidable competitor. This year they haven't been up to the performance of some of the other boats. They've been so good for so many years, and we've all had to work so hard to beat them that now that we've done it, they've got to grab a little bit and grab for a few straws to see if they can't be a little more competitive.
Hey, Ray McMacken, I have a hunch that maybe you've been wanting to jump in here with some comment or question. Am I wrong, or?
Well, the only jump I've been doing, Ron, is to take my coat off because of the heat and listening to the excellent comments of the real expert here. It's refreshing to hear Bill talk about the really inside facts that go on about this fabulous sport. And, of course, he's closer than anybody else could be. One thing I would like to ask Bill, and maybe this is done all the time, but a lot of the fans are unfamiliar with it. We're looking at the Miss Timex now, which is using the three-bladed wheel or propeller, which you gave Mr. McCormick, the driver, and also the rudder. Now, does this go on quite a bit, or are you just sort of a generous individual?
Well, it's just interesting. I drove the boat that he's driving. I drove it and won the World Championship here at Seattle with it, 1969, I think it was, as the Miss U.S. And that particular boat with that wheel and that rudder, it really ran beautifully, at least enough to give us the victory. And Jim has had handling problems with the Timex team this year, and he finally wanted to maybe put the whole combination back together, which would include the wheel and the propeller. The wheel and the rudder came off the Miss Thriftway that we ran to so many historic performances, really. And they've been tremendous, and I'm glad that he's able to make it go. I think that maybe this time Jim's got things glued together, so he's going to be a more competitive factor on Sunday afternoon. Around the country this year, they haven't had the consistency that is absolutely necessary, and they haven't had even those moments of sporadic brilliance, let alone consistent brilliance. And if anybody can get it done from a driving point of view, Jim's superb. He was last year's Gold Cup winner, and he went over and passed for the Atomic Cup. So it is the
Timex hooked in the turn. Now we're looking at the Timex going into the turn here.
See
it hooking there at all?
Let me tell you something, Gray. It's funny. When Jim got that boat, I said, "Hey, Jim, the only thing I can say about it is every once in a while, without warning, that boat is going to bite you." Without telling you about it. And I had it happen to me a number of times, and Dave Seafair, who was my crew chief at the time, and I couldn't explain why all these things happened, but it did happen. Every once in a while, just zap, that boat came down cockeyed sideways or every direction but straight. And Jim has had that happen in the Timex this year.
Well, the Notre Dame has that same problem, too. It'll go like the Dickens down the backstretch and across the start and finish line there, but when it gets into the corner, it pops and that motor grinds and it jumps out of the water and does all kinds of tricks.
Hey, there's the Vans PX, and, of course, this was the one that they were racing to get in shape for the race right up to the last minute, wasn't it, last year, Bill, at Hallmark Homes?
Indeed, with Leif Borgeson, and I didn't catch their qualifying speed. I was too busy trying to glue all of our parts together, but this is the boat that last year, as the Hallmark Homes came down the front chute with our boat, and we were running side by side, and he lost his steering system and nailed us, and we ended up sinking in the pit area. So that's an attitude, and not only he maybe have hit me a little bit, but we got it all stopped and moved in the water so it didn't hit people. That's a good thing. Very important.
Well, Bill, we've been looking at some of the early in the week qualifying runs. Next, we'll have out some of today's qualifying action right after we take a break for this.
Back at Lake Washington again with Bill Muncey and Rod Belcher, and we're going to take a look at some of the activity today which went on here on the lake. And the qualifiers were the Lincoln Thrift at slightly over 111, a Vans PX slightly over 100 miles per hour. The Pizza Pete went out and turned a surprising 104.348, and this is the Value Mart at slightly over 100 and Vans PX at 102. Now we're going to be taking a look at some of the videotape which is shot earlier today.
Let me tell you this, Ray. Don't let this 111 mile an hour that the Lincoln Thrift turned fool you. This is a 3-mile course, and I just last week saw him turn 113 on a 2.5-mile race course. The Lincoln Thrift is an extremely fine boat. It, up to now, hasn't, over a period of years, been too competitive. But this year, they're the most innovative team in racing. They've gone to turbo supercharging, and all they have to do is squeeze that power down a little bit anytime they want and go faster than... Well, they sure are quick, because over in Pasco, Washington, as I mentioned, they turned one lap at 113.5, I think, in competition on a 2.5-mile course. The same equivalent here would be about 118 to 20. So you know that they're just sort of fooling us, bluffing us a little at 111.455 on Lake Washington.
Bob Fendler told me yesterday, Bill, that this is the boat of the future if it works out.
Well, I don't know about the hull, but I know that the engine and its configuration is getting a great deal of attention from all owners and drivers and crew around this race course. And we're quite enlightened, being enlightened at least, with what what has taken place. They just keep going. Every time they throw that sled in the creek, it keeps going quicker and quicker and quicker.
And quieter and quieter. You hardly know what's out there.
Yeah, it's just been a tremendous boat.
He's in the hot heat with you, so you got to run against him tomorrow.
Yeah, I did that once, and I almost lost. I didn't like it at all.
All right, well, the next one we're going to look at is the one that I think he got into the race just where he wanted to. We're not quite ready to show it, but we will, and that's the value mark. How about qualifying at 1:00.465? Only maybe Bob Gilliam could cut it any finer.
That's got to be precision planning in its purest form.
But really, a little bit about the strategy of getting into the less hot heat. How about that, Bill?
Well, there isn't any question. Some of the boats came out here to run in the slower heats simply because it would reduce the engine labor, the disaster opportunity or privilege or whatever to their equipment. And, of course, if they can run in first or second in those slower heats, they're automatically in the final with where the big bucks are. So the Value Mart is a boat that's brand new, launched over in Pasco competitively for the first time. Bill Worcester's driving it. He's had a background and experience of outboard racing and some limited inboard racing, I understand, and he seems to get this new boat around the course pretty well. To be able to sit at 100 miles an hour in that boat, brand new, is a fine performance, and they're just exactly where they want to be.
At 1:00.465. That's dandy planning.
Bill, now that you're in the fast heat, maybe you could explain the advantage of the fast heat over the slower heat. A lot of people have asked me that question.
Were you able to answer them?
No, I wasn't.
I thought maybe that would give me a clue.
I just told them that those that were in the slow race didn't have to go against Bill Muncey.
I can't think of any advantage in being in the fast heat and the preliminary heats at this point. We came out here to try and run as hard as we could. We did within our preparation limitations, the equipment that we had with us. We ran as well as we could, qualified as well as we could. And we had to let it lay there. We wanted to get into the fast heat, and we feel we should give everybody the finest racing that we can give them. So we qualified at 120, which we thought was kind of respectable, for a time at least. It was kind of respectable. I know this, that I only have to run third or fourth or fifth to win a National High Point Championship this year. That's really what we're really interested in.
Well, Bill, now we're looking at Bob Gilliam and the Pizza Pete, which qualified at 104.348, but the miraculous thing about Mr. Gilliam's effort was that he qualified within the time allotted to qualify. Usually you have to run up to midnight for old Bob to get his boat in, right?
Or declare an act of
I don't know. I want to sit back and listen to this poor junk man story. I've heard that before about Gilliam, but let me tell you something that maybe you don't know. The fact is that when he went to Miami to qualify for the first race of the year on a 2.5-mile course now, I hope everybody understands. You go slower on a 2.5-mile course than you do on a 3-mile because the straightaways aren't as long. But Gilliam stuffed that one in the creek, and you know what he did? He went down on the 2.5-mile course and turned 108 mile an hour. That got my attention.
Well, the Pizza Pete is a pretty good boat, really. We'll have a look at some of the spectacular spills of the past coming up next on Hydro Preview.
Films of the famous flip of the Slow-Mo 5. The Slow-Mo boats were kings of the sport in those days. Lou Fagel was at the wheel, moving at about 160 miles per hour when a patch of rough water sent the big boat bouncing first onto one sponson and the other. Finally, her nose went up. She caught air under her bow. Boat and driver, a complete somersault in midair, landing in the original racing attitude and continuing on their way. Let's look at it again in slow motion. There's daylight developing underneath. The bows beginning to go high. Always a terrible danger in hydro racing. And a blast of air catches her and she kites. Up. Over. And back down again. There's been no accident like it before or since. Like this one either. You're looking at the starting run 3 years later, 1958. Every hydro was going 160 to 180 miles per hour. On the far right, Bill Muncey has seized the lead position in Miss Thriftway. Something has seized his rudder. Muncey has lost control as he barrels straight through the middle of the big Coast Guard cutter between the forks of the tree on the left. Let's look at it again in slow motion. What happened to Muncey? Well, he bailed out about 150 yards from the cutter and received only shock and bruises. Had Muncey been not leading in that heat, had there been other boats outside or in front of him when the Thriftway cut through the curve, the outcome could have been tragic. It stands as one of the luckiest accidents, all in all, in the history of powerboat racing. Unless it was the time Wild Bill Cantrell and the Gale 5 went out of control on the south turn, blasted into the bank of the lake, and wound up in the midst of a fashionable race day party in this front lawn.
Well, Bill, it's rather ironic that the last two gentlemen on that piece of film that we've got were your crew chief, Wild Bill Cantrell, and yourself back in 1958. No hard wishes, but...
You know, it's funny. I think Cantrell got sued for disturbing the peace.
I think he did.
For jumping up in that Rose Guard with a lovely party they had. It's like in that Coast Guard boat, there was a fellow asleep down inside.
Yeah.
Here comes 7 unlimited hydroplanes at him, about 170 miles an hour. And I, as you saw, missed, went through and woke him. He was upset and sued me, too.
Did he win?
No, they threw it out of court. It was a nuisance suit.
Nuisance suit.
Gratefully.
Bill Nuisance Muncey going into the Coast Guard boats. Rod, do you have anything to add as far as recollection of accidents out here on Lake Washington or spectacular spills? This being my first year doing the hydroplane calling, of course, I have nothing to go back and remember, but you've done it many times.
There have been some wild ones. Gee, I can remember Dallas Sarks in a spectacular spill out here in the Seattle, Bill, and I remember one of the strangest things that ever happened. I believe it was Chuck Thompson in the Tahoe. That he was thrown out on the deck, climbed back in, and continued the race. Didn't that actually happen, Bill?
You know, I hate to say it, but that seems to be somewhat of a common occurrence in our sport. For some reason, the last thing you want to do is let go of that boat. I've had it happen to me, where I've been just virtually thrown out on the deck and fortunately hung on with one hand and been zapped back into the cockpit. And I'm glad it's happened in every case, although in some places it could be somewhat of a disaster.
Well, you remember the Dallas Sarks spill. Bill, I think we're going to have to get your microphone up there a little closer because of the noise in the background. But at any rate, we had Myra Slowback involved in some spills. I remember Rush Slay catching on fire, and that looked pretty spectacular. And
indeed.
We had some weirdos going on.
We've had a number of ones that have been certainly tragic. Some of the ones that have been more humorous. One I was involved in Madison, Indiana, when I got run over by a houseboat.
Oh, I remember that
who
one.
hadn't qualified. But
he was over the size limits.
Yeah, in a drunken stupor, he proceeded with his 40,000-ton craft to come down and just bury me in among all the other dead bodies and telephone poles that are floating in the Ohio River.
As many victories that you'd had and as big a name as you've done for the sport, you'll always be remembered for going into that Coast Guard cutter in 1958. And Bill Muncey will take a profile look at the drivers in tomorrow's race next on Hydro Preview. Plane drivers, these chauffeurs of the big thunderboats, are certainly complex and involved personalities of every type and imaginable person. They're scientists and physicists, public relations men. Certainly they're daredevil pilots, mechanics, and from time to time they seek out all sorts of adventures. It takes years of experience to be good at the piloting of hydroplanes, and certainly very few men make it, like Bill Muncey here. We'll take a look in the next few moments at the drivers in tomorrow's big race and talk about their individual backgrounds. Go ahead, Bill. You know these people real well.
Well, I don't know, as a matter of fact, there were any of the things that you said we were, Ray, but Bob Gilliam is a Seattle boy who built his first boat, I think, on Army time down in Fort Lewis and is publicized as the world's biggest junk man from Seattle. A very courageous, dedicated kind of person who puts together a team that's interested this year certainly in consistency in performance and getting the most out of his boat and defining its limitations as accurately as they possibly can. Dean was the national champion last year and the year before and made a very courageous move, certainly, to the Notre Dame team this year. He's a fine chauffeur. He always gives a superb performance, and he just is the kind of guy that when he makes, well, you know he's not going to make any mistakes. Every move he makes, you know, is going to be the absolute right move, and it's great. It's just a pleasure to be on the race course with Dean Chenoweth. On the other hand, George Henley is a kind, quiet, very courageous, a very daring kind of individual. He's had great experience in boat racing. He started back in limited hydroplanes. I think he's been in every class of hydroplane. He's the kind of guy that we like to see. He's a purist. He came up through the classes, eventually got involved in unlimited, and he's just doing a magnificent job, as he did last week in the Lincoln Thrift for Bob Fender, breaking the world's record, running second on a 2.5-mile race course. George is a delightful guy, and we're just glad to have him in our sport with. Chuck Hickling has been a Seattle campaigner for years and years. He's driven a number of boats, including the Budweiser boat. He's been around all kinds of class racing. He's a sailor and an avant-garde and all the neat, groovy things that a guy Charlie's age. Charlie's 58, I think, now, and the fact that he can go out there and compete at this level, and he's up to it physiologically and mentally and all that is just marvelous. And he just is a pro in his purest form, a racer, in my opinion. Billy Sterrett is relatively new to our sport. He was with the Notre Dame team last year, and he had a very serious accident here on Lake Washington, and he transferred teams, went to the Pride of Pay and Pack at midseason, and he's been driving just beautifully for Dave Harrisberger and the Pride team. The crew couldn't be happier and couldn't be more pleased as the Budweiser team is with Terry. Terry is the brother of Billy Sterrett, the son of Bill Sterrett Sr., who was the national champion. Terry Sterrett's background is equal to Billy Sterrett. I've always been kind of a favorite, I don't know, personality. I think Terry's a favorite. He's a very good friend of mine, and I've been very, very close to Terry. I think he's a fine coming chauffeur and is doing a great job with the Budweiser racing team. Leif is... well, he's the beautiful people in our sport. Certainly one of the more attractive and handsome guys, and it gets a lot of people's attention as we move around the country, but he happens to be an excellent chauffeur as well. The boat that he drove last year was a brand new boat as they launched it here in 26 days in Seattle. They qualified, I think, back then about 112 mile an hour, and then they, at the last moment here this year, decided to glue it together for the Seattle race. And it took on the part of Alice in Wonderland, it took a great deal of effort on the part of all those corporate members to get that boat glued together and qualified at 100 and some miles an hour. Jim McCormick, last year's Gold Cup winner. Jim moved to the Timex team this year. The boat hasn't been as competitive as Jim McCormick would like it to be, but I think he's beginning at the grassroots level as an owner. He's a fine driver. He's finding out what it is to be a driver, owner, manager, the whole bit, and I think he's reveling in it, as a matter of fact. So you can wait tomorrow or Sunday all day long. It's going to be an exciting thing to watch the Timex boat move around this race course with Jim McCormick at the wheel. Bill Worcester's brand new. I really can't tell you too much about Bill Worcester's background. I know that he's very much involved in outboard competition. He's been in limited classes. He's been very, very close to Bob Gilliam, who's a hydroplane enthusiast. He's the greatest, biggest, most enthusiastic guy we've got in our sport, and he's brought Bill Worcester along. I think Bill's going to do a good job. He qualified the boat for this event, and anybody that can do that deserves a great deal of credit. I think for the first race, and really for his first big, serious race of his career, he did a great job in qualifying the boat for the race. I have nothing to say about this man.
I do. I think he's got a warm personality. He's generous, he's thrift, he's clean, he's reverent, he's brave, etc., etc., etc. Bill Muncey.
Hope someone will root for me.
Bill Muncey talks with the drivers at tomorrow's race next on Hydro Preview. Seafair is filled with traditions, and a Seafair tradition here on KING is to ask Bill Muncey to gather together with the drivers for an informal chat about their feelings concerning tomorrow's big race.
The troops are gathered once again on shining Lake Washington. It's Seafair time. You got to admit, as we travel around the country, there isn't an extravaganza like it anywhere in the world. This is sort of different. How many people could get involved, concerned, and deeply concerned to a point of protest with a don't fence me in problem and people walking into the water to tinkle and things like that? You got to admit that this is, hey, Dean, this is a different experience in racing, isn't it, for you?
It really is. It's like the 500 to the race car drivers. It's great.
And they seem to know how to go about it.
That's right. Everything's organized. The people's here. The enthusiasm's here. It's just what you'd think of racing was to be.
You know, we went to, it's fun, like you go to a little town like Madison, Indiana, where the population is 10,000, and it swells to 10 times its population. People come from under rocks, it seems, and they put their shoes on after filling the back 40 and come into town. It's a tremendous thing, but to me, there's just nothing like this pressure of the Seafair Trophy race in Seattle. Leif, you haven't been on the season all year with us, and you must have enjoyed it, but as sitting back on the sidelines for a portion of the season and watching, I can't imagine that you really and truly enjoyed that.
No, I wasn't very enjoyable at all, Bill. I would like to have been there, and I think it was fun for me this one year to stay off. I'd like to be back, of course, next season, but I did learn a lot of things this year. I learned that Seattle is really coming up with some of their advertising and showing who's winning the heats and races and the radio stations.
Promoting the Eastern races.
Right, promoting all the Eastern races, which we haven't seen in the past, and this is really great for our sport. It's great for us. It's great for our sponsors who are sponsoring us. It's good advertisement, and it was kind of different this time.
So you had to get so enthusiastic once again that you decided to create Alice in Wonderland.
Yeah.
which is quite an imaginative corporation when you think about it,
Especially
considering the guys involved.
Especially when we were in debt, $120 the second day in.
$120 cash. Anyway, you did bring the boat out, and you're gluing it together for this event, and it isn't like you're a well-financed, highly paid organization. It's just contributing it from the heart where it begins, and do you think you got it all glued together to get that job done, Lee?
Well, we're gonna keep working on it. We have a lot of work to do between now and Sunday, of course, and we have only 2 engines to work with, and we don't have all the lines, and we don't have all the fellas with the total patience right now. I think that's running out a little bit at the present time. They just haven't had the sleep and the rest that they need to really get the job done. But these guys have really been working hard, and the boat's a good running boat. And I think if we can just put things together the first 2 heats and find all our problems by then and go in the final, I think we can compete with everybody. Even
for those on King who really don't know all about it, because it hasn't been promoted that much, they did form Allison in Wonderland, and I think that's kind of an imagined thing. They've got some interesting guys who are members of that corporation. I don't know that you're showing an operating profit necessarily at this point.
At the present, like I said, it was an awful hard way to come about a pit pass this year.
Hey, Jim, you know, last year, there's no question about the fact that you were by far the most superior and certainly the most publicized and the most famous guy in our sport, having won the Gold Cup in Madison, Indiana. And things changed in your camper as far as the McCormick family is concerned. You became an owner and a manager and a driver and the whole bit now. You've got also the responsibility of the Timex Corporation, which is a very real pressure. Tell me, would you recommend to the balance of the drivers in this pit area that they maybe pursue a similar consideration?
I think they ought to try it once, Bill. It's quite a different operation, just driving. A lot more headaches involved, quite much more than I even realized there were. Acquiring equipment and getting it built properly to try to be running competitively. Of course, you know we've had problems all year. It's not really bad luck. You create your own luck from lack of preparation, I guess. But we're basically a new team, and I think we've got everything started going in the right direction. We ran better yesterday, qualifying, than we run all year. And thanks to you kind of loaning us a rudder, which certainly helped out our cornering ability in the boat.
What about the company now? Do you have to call them every Sunday night and say, they want to know, hey, Jim, how'd you do? And you've got to respond one way or another and tell them where you did good or badly or what?
No, Bill, they're real good people to work for, really. I send a report to them in after every race.
They don't send a contingency around to help you move in the marketplace?
Not at all. No, we're really on our own. We try to get them all the exposure we can. We have a PR firm out of Los Angeles, California that sets interviews up with newspaper and radio and TV for me and for the crew and for the exposure to the boat. So we file a report after every race as to how we did with the race and what type of exposure we received from newspaper and all the news media, and they seem very well pleased with it, and I'm sure they're going to be back in sport with us again next year.
So far, it's been a good experience then, but has it been a fun experience for Jim McCormick?
Any boat racing experience for Jim McCormick is fun. Very definitely.
That's great. I think it's marvelous when you can sit back and say, hey, it's been difficult and complicated and laborious and, taxing, but it's been a ball.
Nobody loves boat racing any more than I do, Bill. And any type of involvement in the boat racing, I love dearly.
You know, I think, though, that some people, I think most of us really stay in it because it's such a marvelous feeling to win. And interesting enough, the 3-time national champion for the past 3 years is sitting here, Dean Chenoweth. He's from... we used to call it Eczema. No, that isn't it. It's Zania, Ohio, spelled with an X. He was a national champion 3 years in a row and jumped from the national champion boat, which has got to take a lot of intestinal fortitude, Dean, because I know you like winning, and moved on to the Notre Dame. And there in itself is a historical, for historical reference purposes, an interesting thing because, Shirley Mendelson McDonald, in the great tradition of her father, has supported that team for years and years. They've had some of the finest drivers and crews in history there. And yet they haven't been able to put together a successful experience. And you come off a national championship 3 years in a row, jump in a brand new boat, and you're not really enjoying the greatest year in the history of Dean Chenoweth. So how do you resolve this, or how do you within yourself feel that you maybe made the right move?
Well, Bill, first of all, we lost the last 3 races. That definitely hurt us. I think that if we would have had the experience under our belt that we could have competed at Washington, D.C., Madison, Indiana, and the Tri-Cities, I think we'd have been much better prepared to come to Seattle. But as it was, we were working with our CG in Detroit, and we put some makeshift weight up front, and we hit some bad water and lost a sponson, and it cost us, you might say, half the season. 3 out of 7 races, about half the season. So I feel that we would have been much more successful and much better prepared if we would have made these last 3 races, but it was unfortunate that we didn't. And we'll just have to put our marbles back in the bag and regroup this winter and come back next year.
Of course, Dean, you come from a great background of experience, and when you take a new boat, I know they expected you to lean on you and your experience to define the difficulties with that hull or whatever they may be as a new boat is launched. They just never seem to be right immediately upon launching, and of course, you really didn't have a chance in Miami, for instance, when you opened the season. I think you lost a couple of rudders just opening up the season before you had a chance to get on the race course.
That's what I say. I think really, other than Owensboro and Detroit, we lost 4 out of 7 races. In Owensboro, we had our new type skid fin made, and it seemed to turn the boat well and made the boat handle well. So we felt we had our turning problem solved, so we moved on to Detroit, and we figured we'd balance the boat out, and once we did that, we'd be on our road. But we were back on the road, but it was to California to put the boat back together. So, like I say, I think now we've came a long way here in the last couple of days, and I feel that with some more time in the water and more testing time and a little better preparation for next year, the boat should be a good boat for next year.
Hey, Dean, we know that you know how to stab and steer and get it to the first corner first, and you'll get the job done. Jim, good luck to you, Leif. Great to have you with us. You're just a delight to have, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill.
Hydro previews will continue in just a moment after this timeout. Of the Atlas Van Lines truck with a man that needs certainly no introduction, Wild Bill Cantrell, known better for his driving than more or less his mechanic or chief mechanic duties. But now that you are the chief mechanic for the Atlas Van Lines, Bill, could you explain to us how many engines you brought west with you and some of the things about the truck?
Well, as you see here, we brought 5 engines with us. We have 4 with gearboxes on, so that we can make an engine change in about 20, 22 minutes and be ready to get back in the water. And then, of course, we have an overhead crane up here that lifts the engines out, sets them on the ground, and we pick them up with the crane, set them in the boat. And then forward up here, if you look up forward, why, then we have a bench up there, working capacity for us to work on, and carry spare parts in our bins all around on either side, and our extra propellers and shafts. The shafts are carried in under the boat over there. And then forward, we have what we call a VIP room for the chauffeur to rest. It's air conditioned, and the crew, if they get a little tired and we get a little laxed, why, we can go in there and take a break and kind of work out our strategy, what we're going to do, what we intend to do, or what we're trying to do, and kind of have a little conflab.
Now, every driver that I've talked to has said that it's the crew chief and the crew that wins the race. How do you feel about it in reverse?
Well, I say it's 50-50. You got to have a good chauffeur as well as good equipment. I mean, you can take a good chauffeur and put him in some slower equipment. There's no way he can win. You got to have fast equipment for him to win in. And he's got to be a good, willing chauffeur and have a will to win without just going out for a boat ride and have that desire.
For those curious, how much money-wise are we looking at inside this truck right now?
Well, at the engines, you're looking at about $6,500 a piece at each engine. And, of course, we used to get them for $150, but now it costs you around $3,000 to get an engine. And, of course, when we get them, they're wore out practically. They're all takeouts out of planes, and we have to go through the engines, magnaflux them, die check everything, and make sure that the engine's within its limits, what the book calls for, before we start putting them together.
But this truck is a fully equipped home away from home, so to speak, as far as the crew is concerned.
Well, that's right. We have to have something that we can work in and carry enough equipment along. It may not need as big a van as this, but we wanted to have something comfortable. When we got this van, we were running 2 boats. And so we really don't need quite the space that we have now. We're only running 1 boat, but running 2 boats, we had to have a lot of room to carry enough engine for both boats and equipment.
You've had an extremely successful year so far with Muncey and the crew here, but Bill told me that he hasn't blown an engine this year. Is that right?
That's right. He hasn't. We haven't lost an engine yet in his boat, although we did lose 2 engines in the old boat. Of course, the fact was that the engines that Bill had ran, we kept running them in the old boat, and finally they just got tired. And, this iron will only last so long. They don't make any new parts for it, and it's all old stuff that we get. And we probably take 2 or 3 engines and get the best parts out of it. So it probably got tired. You can magnaflux everything and have it checked, but it never tells you when the metal is fatigued. When it's tired and ready to go, it can tell you if there's a crack in it, but that's all.
You mean these engines talk to you, Bill? They say, I'm tired, replace me?
They'll begin to come in spitting oil, and you begin to look for them, and you give a compression check, and you'll find 1 or 2 cylinders are down, not up to par, and you look at Q-note, that's the oil filter, and you pull that out, and you few little metal flakes in there, then you know you better retire the engine, or because if you keep running it and you cut the engine too, it's lost forever. There's no way of ever bringing it back because that case and block and all is ruined, and they're not manufacturing anymore, so that is lost to the fraternity of racing forever.
Wouldn't you know it? A few hours after we conducted that interview with Wild Bill Cantrell, Bill Muncey went out and blew a hole right in the side of that engine that they said they hadn't blown all season.
I just put a couple of rods to sleep is all I did.
A couple of rods to sleep. Little window on the side. But everything's ready to go for tomorrow. And Hydro Previews will continue with a look at tomorrow after this message. Tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock, more Seattle area television sets will be tuned here to Channel 5 to watch the 1972 Seafair Trophy Race. 20 years of experience is packed into covering this race. We have 8 color cameras strategically located all over the racetrack. We've got a battery of extra goodies like slow motion and Vidafont graphic effects. Figure that one out. Here's a look at where our camera positions are located and just exactly what you'll be seeing. To bring you King's complete coverage of this, the 1972 Seafair Trophy Race requires, believe it or not, some 80 people. Now, the majority, of course, are behind the 8 color cameras located strategically around this 3-mile race course. Now, these fine and experienced technicians do the vital work of this complicated job. So let's run down the 8 camera positions where King will be bringing you the complete coverage of the race. Camera number 1 is located on the north turn. Don McGowan is the man that mans camera number 1, which is located just off Lake Washington Boulevard. Don will be capturing the big hydros as they come screaming up the backstretch at speeds of 160 and 170 miles per hour. They come into that north turn with Roostertail's fly. Camera number 2 is located on the starting line. On the official barge, Don Kelly is the man behind camera number 2. He captures the race from the start and the finish line as they scream right in front of the official camera and go into that south turn. Camera number 3 is located directly behind the official barge on a hill. It's called the Hilltop Camera, and Trin Siniga mans that camera. It's located directly overlooking the course and has perhaps the most complete view of the whole 3-mile layout. Camera number 4 is on the south turn, the one you probably have heard the most about. And Chuck Horn is the man that takes camera number 4 responsibilities. It's located on the ground, Seward Park. And it takes the big hydroplanes into that south turn, which is the first turn on the 3-mile course, and according to the drivers, the most vital. For out of the south turn is where you come up the backstretch, with or without the lead. On camera number 5, we go to the pits. 2 men responsible for this intimate look at the big hydros as the crews feverishly work at them between heats. Art Feverage, Don Mitchell. They man what's known as the creepies. They're the little portable cameras mounted on their back. And believe me, when the temperatures are in the 80-degree mark, that's a pretty hot and vital responsibility. Also in the pits, camera number 6. The technicians call it the giraffe. Some people call it the cherry picker, the boom camera. Whatever you call it, it's capable of going 50 feet in the air. Don Minks mans this vital responsibility, and he has the big number 6 giraffe camera, which sees everything in the pits, as you see it here. Camera number 7 is Pit Central. Dick Barr, the man behind the camera in this one. Rod Belcher, the man behind the microphone at this position. And Pit Central is exactly what it means. It's the centrally located camera which can pan all the way around and give you the ground view of what the giraffe number 6 camera gives you from the air. Back on the official barge again, camera number 8. Jim King is the man that brings you this picture. Tell you exactly where it is. It gives you the picture of Mike Fitzsimmons and Ray McMacken. 8 color cameras. Well, Bill Muncey, it's all set to go. The stage is set. Good night's sleep. Preparation should be in your head and inside of those big engines, and everything ready to roar at 11 o'clock tomorrow morning.
You know what I think, Ray? I think that certainly when you're here at a race site, the atmosphere of racing is something to behold and to be a part of it. It's a great experience, but King's coverage, as usual, is going to be superb, and I hope that we can drive the good race tomorrow.
Well, we'll be seeing you tomorrow at 11 o'clock for the Seafair Trophy Race 1972 here on
KING, Channel 5.